Hello ladies and gentlemen, how are you all doing? Blu-Roy Movies back for another video. Now on my last video, my weekly watches, I did a little joke where I was reading this book at the start, pretended it was my Bible. Well, one of my subscribers, a Caledonian dude, he asked me in the comments how many films I'd seen out of this book, 1001 movies before you die, and I didn't have a clue, so I thought, you know what, I'll go through, have a look, add them up, see how many I have seen. Now I've wrote them all down, well not every single title, but I've done it decade by decade, how many I've seen each decade, and just a few bullet points from each decade really, directors that have stood out for me in them decades. So I'm going to crack on. My book, it goes up to 2019, so I'm guessing there's a later updated version that you could probably buy that's covered the last few years, but up to 2019, this is how many I've seen. Now, pre-1920, when cinema's in its infancy, I saw 5 of what's in the book. Then 1920s, the silent cinema era, which I enjoy. Directors like Fritz Lang, Buster Keaton, F.W. Murnau. Can you get out of the way, Cat? Charlie Chaplin. I've seen 11 films from the book. Then we move on to the 1930s. Talk is just coming in, making cinema maybe accessible for a lot more people. In the 30s, for me, directors starting off their careers like Frank Capra, Howard Hawks, George Cukor. Disney was starting to get going with their animation. Universal Monsters, I enjoyed them. They started cranking out their films with the likes of Dracula and Frankenstein, and we saw sweeping epics like Gone with the Wind and Wizard of Oz. Now in the 1930s, from this book, I've seen 25 films. We now move on to the 1940s. Directors coming to the fore for me, my favourites, Billy Wilder. Hitchcock started his career, well, he started it in the late 30s, but I think he started coming into his pomp in the 40s. David Lean, John Ford, John Huston, Michael Curtis. We had classic films like Citizen Kane, Casablanca, and from the book in the 40s, I've seen 38 films. We then move into 1950s, which is possibly, if I had to choose, it might even be my favourite decade of cinema. We had some great foreign directors coming into their pomp. Akira Kurosawa, Jacques Tati, Ozu, Henri Georges Clouzot. Yeah, really, really good stuff there. In the 50s, I've seen 51 from the book, so my best so far. Then we move into the 1960s. For me, Jean-Luc Godard, Samuel Fuller. We have Sierra Leone with the Dollars trilogy and Once Upon a Time in the West. George A. Romero started cranking out his zombie films. The birth of Bond in the 60s. A lot of stuff going on in the 60s. And I saw 40 from the book. 70s. Excuse me. The 70s. Right, we've got the likes of Dario Argento, Sam Peckinpah, Francis Ford Coppola with The Godfather, William Friedkin, Martin Scorsese setting out on his journey, Spielberg introducing us with the summer blockbuster with Jaws. Then we have birth of Star Wars, really, really important era. In the 70s, 52 films. Let's have a swallow of my tea. Then we move into the 1980s, the decade of my birth. Yeah, right. Tarantino, Peter Jackson, Kevin Smith, a favourite of mine, Fincher, the Coen brothers, Paul Thomas Anderson, M. Night Shyamalan. Don't skip that, I've got on to 90s. Ignore Ignore me there. Sorry, 80s. David Lynch, Ridley Scott, Brian De Palma, uh, James Cameron, Robert Zemeckis, Oliver Stone, John Hughes. Classic names in directors there. In the 1980s, I've seen 55 from the book. Right, 1990s. Back to how we were. Tarantino, Peter Jackson, Kevin Smith, Fincher, Coens, Paul Thomas Anderson, M. Night Shyamalan, all great directors coming into their fore. And I've seen 48 films from the book. Now, 2000s, I noticed there's a big drop off of numbers that's in the book. Now, to me, whether that's saying that new films are getting poorer, I don't know, or does the author and editor, whose name is Stephen J. Schneider, does he think that maybe films take time to ruminate before they can enter such a mighty tome as 1001 movies to see before you die? I don't know, draw your own conclusion, but I think 2000s, for me, like the emergence of Nolan, Park Chan-wook, and I saw 17 films out of the book. Yeah, a lot less films in it. Then my last decade in my book was the 2010s. For me, Damien Chazelle, Ari Aster, Bong Joon-ho with the marvellous Parasite, and I've seen 29. So that's a total of 371. Not even 40%. I watch a lot of films, but that's a pathetic total. Anybody else got any clues how many films they've seen out of these books? Let me know. I'd be interested to find out. And Caledonian Guy, I hope that answers your question. I'll see you again on the next video. Goodbye.